Hey everyone, welcome in to another daily editorial here on the KE Report. Corey and Chad here chatting with Matt Battiali. He writes the New Energy Investor, which is published under the Mangrove Investor. Now, we have been bringing Matt back on the show to talk about some of the news in the critical minerals space. And sure enough, we keep on getting some what I consider quite positive news in this space where we now have another major car manufacturer, Ford, signing deals with lithium companies to secure supply for lithium in their continued move more into electric vehicles. We have everybody from SQM, Albemarle, as well as a slightly smaller company that Ford is, again, securing its supply with the continued move into EVs. This is one of the aspects that continues to draw me to this sector because of the fact that it's a different funding source for these companies in the space, and just continues to show that, look, there is potential for lithium producers, especially. Who knows if this money will filter down into some of the smaller lithium companies, but Matt, can you recap this news that was quite consistent out of Ford here in terms of its lithium focus and these companies?
Absolutely. And thanks for having me on again, guys. I really appreciate it. Yeah, this was a pretty big bombshell to me. It came out yesterday. Reuters has a really good piece on it. But Ford basically committed to buying lithium from a bunch of different sources. Albemarle was one of the big winners because Ford signed a deal with them to buy more than 100,000 metric tons of lithium hydroxide. And the deal says it has to be either produced in the States or originating in a country with a free trade agreement with the States, which means that Ford is really angling to source metal that will be beneficiated by the laws that were put in place, giving tax breaks to these electric vehicle makers that source their metal from either the States or a country with a free trade agreement. It's the only way you can get in under the bar and get the full $7,500 credit for each vehicle. So Ford's taking that seriously, but it's not just Albemarle. I mean, like you said, Compass Minerals, they have a deal, a 5-year supply agreement from Compass's project in Ogden, Utah. That's basically 40% of Compass Minerals' projected lithium carbonate, and they're not even in production yet. Nemaska Lithium, which is the one in Quebec, these guys, they have a checkered past, but they have agreed to sell 13,000 tons of lithium hydroxide per year to Ford. And that's going to come from the Bécancour processing facility. So that's, again, it's just coming on stream. Ford's actually going to be their first customer. And then there's a private company called Energy Source Minerals, which I'd never heard of, but that's a California producer. They will be in production in 2025, and Ford has signed a deal with them. And then SQM, which is the giant one in Chile, they have a long-term agreement. So there was no dollar amount put on these deals, but in my view, like this is a pretty big milestone for mining and particularly for lithium. But where we have an end user in an electric vehicle manufacturer that is bringing capital to mining companies that aren't even in production yet. By signing these deals, they're injecting capital into development projects that need it at an absolutely critical time in these mining companies where they need this capital, and it gives the mining companies something to take to their shareholders to say, look, we're a business now. We are going to produce this. We're going to sell it at a profit. We're an actual business. We're not a science project. So that was my takeaway from this Ford deal.
Well, Matt, it's also on the back of some other big deals we've seen. Let's remember that in January, General Motors announced a lithium offtake agreement with Lithium Americas Corp, where they're going to do 650 million in equity investment and supply, and that's on their Thacker Pass in Nevada, which is also in development, not in production yet. And then you have what we talked about in our last interview, Matt, where Tesla is building this large battery factory, but also a lithium processing center all in the same area. And what's interesting about that is they've already made an offtake agreement for nickel from Talon Metals. So now the speculation is out that Tesla, just like General Motors and Ford, may also do an offtake agreement with some domestic lithium company or a free trade agreement. So when you see all these car companies getting busy doing offtake agreements, do you think this could spill over into other critical minerals besides just lithium, or is it just being lithium dominated because of these batteries right now?
It's a good question. I think part of it is just because the lithium supply has been so limited, right? It only comes out of a couple places. I mean, remember, this is a relatively young metal. We really didn't use it for much. And then all of a sudden, there's the demand spike is ridiculous. So you need to develop new sources in new places. I think that's why lithium is in the focus. But I certainly could see cobalt, nickel, eventually copper seeing the same sorts of deals. It just is going to depend on the limitations. And I think that angling for that for the tax break may help, right? Because that's really what's driving development of lithium in North America is the tax breaks to get the full $7,500 in tax breaks. We do produce copper in enough places. We don't produce enough cobalt or nickel. So yeah, I certainly could see that where these battery makers and car makers are aiming in that same direction.
So, Matt, when we drive down a little bit further from, I guess, companies funding some of these projects and these big auto manufacturers, a lot of people think of, well, maybe the governments will start giving out some free money. And they do have pools of money set aside. But is it just enough for the governments to give these tax breaks, these incentives to these larger companies that do have cash on their balance sheets to spur this sort of funding that really is needed for the resource sector?
Actually, in Canada, they have a program that I really think is the right way to go. And in the States, um, in order to spur domestic oil drilling, they allowed investors to write off all of the materials that are considered disposable or expendable. They all became tax write-offs. And so that was a way to spur investment. And I've seen Canada doing that now with critical metals, where you have flow through dollars that, as long as they're spent in Canada and they're used in the ground, basically to pay for drilling or mapping or exploration or geophysics, there you can write that off your taxes. The I think that is a much better way for governments to kind of spur investments, and it spurs investment at a very fundamental level. So instead of um, becoming kind of a slush fund for larger producers, it's actually it spurs competition and it spurs innovation at a very fundamental level that in an area or in a segment of our industry that doesn't have a lot of access to capital, or certainly not easy capital. So by making capital investments at that lower level, certainly at the geophysics, surveys and the drilling level, I think that's an area that would be most beneficial to see that money spent. Long-winded, but that's what I'm thinking about.
Well, Matt, just on the investing angle here for people listening that are trying to decide what to do, a lot of these lithium stocks, if you look, there's about 200 of them vying for everybody's attention. Some of them have really spiked hard over the last couple of years. Some of them have done parabolic moves up and right back down. Other ones have taken a while to get off the mat. But it seems like most of this government money or the manufacturing money is going into development stage projects. There's a few producers on there like SQM, but a lot of these companies that you just listed off are companies with projects moving towards production. Is that the sweet spot for investors to find de-risk projects that are moving towards feasibility studies? Or how do you see it when you're writing your newsletter and you're talking to investors? Where's the sweet spot for investors here?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think for a lot of these development projects, we may be, we may be past the risk to reward that appeals to me. I mean, the construction phase in mining is typically what we call orphan stage, where investors really don't care about them when you're building it because there's no good news catalysts. There's only bad news or just kind of, oh, okay, yeah, you did what you said you'd do. So there wasn't any move upward. And now with Ford, with all the news coming that these we listed Ford and GM, but it's also been Volkswagen and Mercedes also have invested in these guys. We may have missed it, for investors for these development projects. So if I'm looking at if I'm looking at putting risk capital to work in lithium right now, I'm going to find the best project that's being drilled, that's going to go into development, then and it hasn't signed a deal with an automaker yet, because that's probably the next thing. And I want it to be again in North America or in a country that has a free trade agreement with North America. But if I'm looking to make some money without taking a lot of risk, and so with the understanding that we're not going to double our money in these things, but there is a play to be made by watching Nemaska or some of these other small publics that are in development. Their share prices are going to go down as the news wears off. So maybe buying these guys on a dip might be the right play. Those are the two options I would say. The risk capital, I'm still looking at exploration plays, late stage exploration plays for kind of modest returns without the risk. I would come back to Compass, Nemaska, Albemarle on dips at this point.
Okay. Hey, Matt, thanks for breaking down, again, more, I think, positive news out of the lithium space with large auto manufacturers investing or at least taking some interest in these producers and near-term producers. Again, this is just the auto sector that everyone keeps circling back around to for lithium, and the news just keeps on coming out for these companies. I find it very interesting to follow along with what's going on in the critical minerals and especially lithium, plus the potential for technology advances when it comes to how to extract some of these newer, let's call them lithium deposits. That's a whole other topic that we could get into. But you know what? We are out of time for this one. So I'm going to post a link to the Mangrove Investor website. Everyone can read over some of your services over there, as well as this new energy investor. And we're going to be chatting with you again in another couple weeks. So thanks again for spending time with us today, Matt.
Thanks for having me, Corey. Shad, it was great talking to you guys.